schools to K-8s, which is a model that we have spent a good deal of time considering, stating it doesn't work for these schools. So I don't know if we're thinking that dropping the focus school on top of the neighborhood program is going to somehow magically dissolve all of the issues that we've had as a K-8 prior, for either school. I mean, that's our very first biggest question is, why is this program being supplanted as a K-8 program onto K-5 schools?
Okay.
And I mean, people are genuinely curious why Woodstock and Arleta were chosen. That is the question that I have gotten repeatedly. Why our schools?
Understood. I don't know if Dr. O, you want to speak to the first part of that question in terms of the K-8 versus the K-5, and then Ethan, maybe why those two schools were chosen.
I think that's a better response from Judy. And is she in this room?
She is not.
Oh.
Okay, so that we have to get more answers on that, Sandra, and maybe we can do that in the debrief.
Okay.
To talk about the difference between K-8 and K-5. And then Ethan, maybe you can talk about the selection of those particular schools.
Yeah, just speaking purely around the selection of Arleta and Woodstock, when Creative Science does move, we're looking at moving a program that has an enrollment around 450 as a K-8, and that limits the specific buildings where we would be able to move it and keep an 80% capacity in that building. So Woodstock and Arleta are two buildings that fit that mold.
And there were no others in Southeast?
There are a few other buildings, purely looking at the dashboard. There are a few other buildings in Southeast, I believe, two others, possibly Marysville and Whitman, but give me a second and I can get those specifics.
Micah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and I apologize for being dense on this, but the transition would be if we move CSS, well, when we move CSS to either Arleta or Woodstock, all the current CSS students who would like to stay with the CSS program will all move to either location, right?
I believe that is the plan, yes.
And then what happens to the current students at going to Arleta or Woodstock? They will automatically be in the CSS program if they choose to. That's their neighborhood school.
Yeah.
And then those who don't want to get to opt out to another school.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's like that's a guaranteed thing. We just don't know what those schools are.
Yeah, I believe that opt-out program is a part of this scenario, right? So yes, it would be like if you don't want to be part of CSS, and whether the model is Arleta or Woodstock or wherever it ends up, that you do have the choice to move out of that model.
And then could we look at the heat map for CSS right now, just to see? I'm interested in terms of who is currently attending CSS right now.
We have the heat map, unfortunately, by actually.
We do have a heat map of CSS enrollment.
It's not that density map right there?
That, yes.
These density maps are oh no, right here. Here's the
right there
map for Creative Science.
And that is by CSS enrollment. And so in modeling CSS enrollment at another school, assumptions were made based on current enrollment draws, that it's drawing heavily from the neighborhood that it's located in. Currently, CSS draws heavily from what will become the Clark
So
attendance
the
area.
current students attending CSS would have to lug over to Arleta or Woodstock.
The model assumes phase phasing those students in and then slowly replacing it with
Right.
neighborhoods. So the model is really, focusing on the long term, and that same goes with looking at long-term viability in terms of capacity. So it's mostly looking at moving the program and then evaluating how that affects the long term in terms of enrollment across the board.
Okay, I want to be sure we're allowing everyone a chance to speak. Elizabeth, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think it's a simple question, I hope. I think somebody in the earlier presentation said we may not be able to tweak boundaries now, and I just kind of wanted to understand what that meant. And like, which boundaries were they talking about? I didn't quite understand what that pertained to.
I'm going to try to answer that. I think I might have been the one that said that. What I was saying is the purpose of today's meeting is not to try to refine boundaries like street to street or move them around. I believe that is the purpose of the meeting on Thursday, right? So today we want to really focus on understanding what the big issues are and seeing if what the program shifts are and if there's feedback analysis based on that. And then on Thursday, when we, because the purpose of the meeting on Thursday is to refine these scenarios, whether it's by moving boundary lines or thinking about maybe this group should go here instead, so that way when we take it out to community, it will be kind of the best guess, if you will, that the SEGC can take based on the plans that have been provided by PPS. Does that make sense, Elizabeth?
It does. So in the greater task of our group, we will be looking at boundaries. It's just not what we're doing right now.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
I see your hand, Sandra, but I want to be sure that we are allowing anyone else that has a question that hasn't had or an opportunity. Chris, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm finding myself a little confused by, I love the image of guardrails, but I'm not sure what they mean. Could someone give me a few synonyms for that in the context of this?
I'm gonna call them
Guardrails.
modeling drivers. Oh, go ahead, Dr. O.
Oh, I was gonna say that guardrails are exactly what you said. They're drivers. They're the reason we do something. They're the boundaries within which we can function as a result of the goal that we have set to accomplish.
Okay,
So
so
what
if I'm in the classroom and you walk in my classroom, that's my purpose statement that's on the board?
So that is your purpose statement. It's also how you operate in the classroom. Here are the expectations within the context of whatever it is you're teaching.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
Sure.
Andy.
I guess one clarifying question on the DLI stuff. So both these scenarios have some or all of the Spanish DLI currently at Kellogg going to Harrison Park. And I know that the board had passed something as part of phase 1 that says anyone who's currently at Kellogg can finish at Kellogg. Do we imagine that being true for the DLI students? So in other words, like, are the current Spanish DLI students at Kellogg, would they relocate to Harrison Park or would they finish at Kellogg?
That is a good question. I don't know that Ethan or Dr. O, do you have that answer? If not, we will put it here and we will be sure to get that answered.
I feel like we just go through questions because we only have like 2 minutes left. So yeah, don't answer, don't answer it. I feel
Okay,
like we
all
could
right.
have gone for another 10 or 15 minutes on this, but.
Right, you're right about that. So go ahead and ask questions and we'll answer that later.
I have one more sort of in that, well, which is just, well, never mind. We can get into it in A and B yeah, so I'll stop.
Okay. Anyone else that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? That wants to speak about the impact of their community relative to the program shifts?
I guess I'll name, well, if that's the prompt, like I'll name, okay, like in one of these,
Sure.
the DLI shift would cause Bridger to effectively close, right? Like if Bridger becomes a Chinese DLI, you're moving literally every student out of the school that's currently there, if I understand correctly, next year. And I think that's the only school that would experience that level of change, unless I'm missing something. In the second scenario, it's different because the Spanish DLI stays. But
Okay.
Karina, I guess I can add a question. just about the Arleta and Woodstock communities is how much do they know about the CSS program? So they understand what this program is. So how are they getting information about that? Or what information have they had about creative science?
And that's exactly what I was thinking. It's kind of the publicizing and marketing of if we move this program, so the families know what they may have to get into.
I think it's less about what they know about CSS and more the concern that you're completely supplanting their current culture that they already have. And then parents have concerns about the culture of CSS and the culture of focus schools in general, and how that's going to affect their own culture, especially people who specifically chose not to come.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Kathleen is going to be taking notes, so I'm going to share my screen yet again. All right. Am I off mute? Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. So wanting to talk about the impacts of this scenario. So in this scenario, yeah, what are some impacts to scenario B? Who are we impacting? What are some questions? You know, what are the pros and cons of this particular scenario?
I thought we're looking at A, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Why not in A?
No, I thought you said B. I apologize.
No, it is A. Yeah, I don't think I did, but if I did, I'm mistaken. Proposal A. Anybody? Nope.
My take on this one was the metrics are really good compared to B, even better than B, right? But there is a lot of just general geographic wonkiness required to get there, right? So like, you know, this is the one I believe where Atkinson is going to Hosford. That like you can tell that I wonder if part of me wondered if this is the rationale, right? Like if you're gonna get our equity metrics all the way up, right? And then that's the priority. Like it takes a lot of geographically weirder change
Geographic,
to
yeah,
get there,
changes.
right? So that was kind of my takeaway. And again, I will say, like, just I'm trying my best, obviously, to look at the big picture. I will say this obviously has the most extreme of the two impacts on Bridger, right? Like, again, you're in that situation where you're turning over the whole school, which I don't think happens to any other school in either of these proposals. And my take there is sort of like, I'd be open to it if we could make the case that like this were like a way more equitable result and this was the only way to do it. But I feel like there needs to be a pretty high bar for asking for that level of change from a school. Like the result has to be way better and more equitable across the region compared to the other to go down there.
Yeah, I think your point is right on the in at least as it relates to DLI in proposal A, we are moving those programs to where the higher density of those native speakers live. Chris, I think you had your hand up. Oh, you're on mute again. Coming to you next, Lee. I saw you, so take yourself
I
off.
thought about coming off and then I was like, no, I might have wait till the last minute. From the viewpoint of Lane and Whitman, it increases our attendance areas in ways that are contiguous. It's going to help us get up that enrollment. That I was really thankful for those things. And if you're looking at not wanting to impact the highest poverty areas with lots of Black and not so many Native kids that I'm aware of, but more Black and biracial kids, it's really encouraging that they're the ones that are getting some benefit from this, and that just feels really positive to me.
Okay, Leah, did you Yeah, go ahead.
I think, yeah, I unmuted for just a second.
Okay.
Obviously, the DOI program in Harrison Park for our families, probably 65 to 70% of which are native speakers. This option is something that makes it easier for them. Many of those families do not drive. They're being cared for by grandparents, etc., and they're the primary people getting kids to and from school, and they use public transportation. And so I think this is a good option if we're really looking at it from an equity lens of who has some of those barriers and how can we take away those barriers.
Which is essentially, I believe, kind of what you were getting at there, Chris, as well. Okay. Anybody else? Micah, I see your hand is up.
So I am the lone Lewis parent who have kids that are no longer at Lewis. They're in Selwood now, but no one stepped up, and I still care for our community. And in both scenarios, proposals, part of east of 52nd, those families are going to Whitman. And I know from the survey, there are, there are responses as to, hey, I bought in this neighborhood for this reason, blah, 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 right? So, and I just hope that there is a communication of group or forums or whatever for Whitman and Lane to go to Lewis to communicate, hey, this is our school and this is why our school are comparable to whatever, right? So there's no super backlash from these families.
Okay. I saw your hand up, Chris. I just want to be sure. Sandra hasn't had a chance to speak, so I'm going to go to her first. Go ahead, Sandra.
I had a couple of comments. So one, I'm wondering how we're balancing with the Bridger and Harrison Park transitions in this scenario. I feel like part of the surveys we heard, what was pointed out is there are a lot of families that take public transit and would want an option in their neighborhood. But then I also heard a very strong voice that the Chinese DLI families also felt like they were being pushed to the outer limits of Portland and wanted to remain in an area closer in. So I just had wanted to bring that up. And the second point is, and I don't think this has been broached yet, but it's something that's bothered me all the way back to when we did DBRAC, is that there's such a push, at least there was in phase one, for neighborhoods, school cohorts to stay together. But all along, Whitman has been Whitman, Lane, Cleveland, and they're the only students that get shuffled off to an entirely different high school than their middle school peers. And that's always seemed inequitable to me, like that these kids they have each other from their middle school, but they have to start over effectively in high school. So if we're going to be placing importance on cohorts at all, I just want to voice that concern.
Okay. Will you repeat, just so that I capture it, Sandra, the communities
Whitman,
you talked about?
So just, what we've heard, I just want to examine what we've heard from our DLI communities.
Yep.
And I also want to know how Whitman feels about continuing on to Cleveland and not remaining with the rest of their middle school cohort.
Okay. Whitman's matriculation path. Okay, got it. Anyway, I see you, Chris. I just want to be sure that we've given everybody else a chance to speak. Okay, Chris, then you, Andy. Go ahead.
Sure, I can speak to both of those concerns. One, I speak, my kids all went, I still have a grandchild at Whitman. All my grandkids went there. Yes, Whitman parents mostly feel bad that their kids are the ones that get shoveled off to Cleveland. Most of them would prefer to stay in the cohort. A couple of exceptions, and I won't go into that now. Also, speaking to the other person who said those people that are living that would now be moved into the Whitman and Lane catchment. I already got a direct message from somebody this morning saying exactly that. That's why they bought their house there. They didn't want to have to send, and they actually said this very directly. They did not want to send their kids to go to school with those kids at Whitman Lane. So I think the district put us in this situation. My grandkids have had great experiences at those schools. They're staffed by caring, hardworking, capable professionals who many of them are just as good at teaching the what creative science says they do, the constructivism, as anybody else in the district. But it's correct that they're perceived as the poor places nobody wants to send their kids. So that's a situation we're in that we will need help with.
Thank you. Okay. Assuming Kathleen, you're keeping these. I don't see where you are, but I think you're off in the periphery. So there you go.
Yes, I am. I was having some navigation challenges, but
Okay,
I've got them
good. I
going.
see you're there now. I think we're caught up. So I'm going to let you take notes from here forward. Andy had his hand up, I think, before you, Elizabeth. So I'm going to go to you, Andy.
Yeah, although I don't think Elizabeth had a chance to talk yet, so I'm
You're right.
I'm happy to wait.
Look at you. Good job monitoring your voice, Andy. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry. First, I just want to own that I feel like I'm just swimming in data, and it's a lot, and I'm trying to understand it. And I also want to just say, I really appreciate the racial impact analysis that was provided with all of these things. And I feel like you've done a really good job of kind of creating a bright line between what we're trying to accomplish and how these things serve our greater goals. So I really appreciate that. The only thing I notice is that, and I'm starting to hear from the Tabor community, is that it feels like Tabor and Vestal are being set up to be sent to McDaniel. And I know it's not part of the conversation, but I know it will become part of the conversation. And I just want to foreshadow that that's going to have a lot of dynamics to it. And as much as possible, I just want to be able to speak to these proposals in the context of the outcomes that we're trying to create. And so as much as possible, if we can address some of these external questions, I think that would help me do what I'm here for.
Okay, I
And
appreciate that.
That relates to one of the things I was going to ask, which is just kind of a clarifying question, which is, so for example, I think in this scenario, Atkinson's neighborhood would go to Hosford. Like, does this actually change high school boundaries, or does that mean you've set up a split feeder at Hosford? Like, even just with what we've got now, I know there's potential future changes to high school boundaries, but so you can put a pin in that if you don't know. But I think I'm getting a lot of questions already. Like, does any of this change high school boundaries by default?
Yeah, I
if you
believe
change?
and Esther, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't change the current boundaries
Right.
until such time that there is a high school review process and the boundaries change there, right? So it would be split because you would be still sticking with your current boundaries,
Mhm.
is my understanding.
And that is accurate.
Yeah, that was mine too. I just wanted to check. Although I take, Elizabeth, your point that obviously people could read the tea leaves on
Can read the
something,
tea
so,
leaves, yeah.
I had two other
Go ahead.
small things.
We've
One,
got about 2 minutes. Go ahead.
yeah. So real quick, echo what Leah said about like the transportation, like access to Chinese DLI for Harrison Park. It's one of the things where like we'll get to it in B, but I totally agree with you that like A to B, the potential impact on Chinese DLI at Harrison Park with transportation, this one does a better job on that than B for sure. And then last point, which hasn't come up, I think this is the one where even the Lent DLI would go to Harrison Park. So sort of, undoing fully what we did at Kellogg. And I think I'm excited about Harrison Park as a middle school, to be clear, but I know the Lent community had felt really strongly about Kellogg, and just want to name that this scenario would, that's something to consider in terms of the impact on the communities we're trying to send.
Okay, Micah, I want to get to you before we get a chance to.
And this is real quick, just on information in terms of heat maps and where native speakers are living or concentrated is, do we have information and trends on immigration, right? In terms of past and where it's going, because this is a maybe larger political issue on terms of, what type of immigrant populations are moving to Portland, where they're going to be at.
Yeah, I'll let
Yes.
Ethan speak to that and talk
Yeah.
about kind of what data they used for the future forecast.
Yeah, at present, we don't have any, any SES, any racial breakdowns are just going to be based on current data. We can't really forecast into the future, but sort of to your question about whether we have past things so that we might see trends, we potentially have past student data that would show us where certain communities are living, but it is slightly kind of difficult to predict the exact demographic breakdown of a population 5 years out, 10
Yeah.
years out.
You-
So-
No, I agree. Like if we put Chinese DLI at Woodstock and the trend is that, hey, the Chinese population is going to be out 82nd, 92nd and east, right?
Mhm.
And then
Yes.
that gets to transportation and equity.
Okay, anyone else? Pros and cons of scenario A. Haven't heard from some of you. Sorry, I don't know if you want to speak up, Michelle. Go ahead.
I'm okay. I'm actually filling in for Maya, so thank you
Yeah.
for letting me join
course.
everybody. So I'm just trying to diligently take notes and bring that back. So right now I'm
Okay.
just listening. Thank you, though.
But you, Michelle, you good?
Right, I'm good.
Okay. Then Elizabeth, you got your hand up.
So I feel like this is a really fraught question, and I'm just wondering if the CSS relocation as a whole school is non-negotiable, and it's because I don't understand the history and the context. And if somebody just wants to I don't want to bring it up in the big room because I think it's just volatile, but I don't understand it. And if somebody was able to explain it to me, that would be helpful.
Is that regarding CSS staying as a K-8?
There's a whole, it's not in the mandate, but there's a whole assumption that CSS moves as an entirety as a K-8.
Yes.
And I just don't understand the history and the context, and I just want to understand it better because it seems to have a hugely, it impacts things.
I understand that in 2009, the board made the agreement for CSS to stay as a K-8.
I think we need, let's do it in the big room. I think we need an answer that's not relying on technical pieces of board policy. I say it as someone who might agree with it, but like, if you can't convince us who are relatively open-minded or get us to understand the connection, I don't know how you're going to take this to the wider community. So I do think that's something that I also would appreciate a clear answer.
Right. And I think what the other second part of the question that I heard you ask, Elizabeth, yes, there is. What is the rationale for doing that? Which Dr. O started to speak to. But then is the model K-8 versus K-5 as a move a non-negotiable, right? I think that was the second part of your question.
Andy,
Yeah,
you're
like,
right. It's
I
a
just-
whole group discussion.
Yeah, I just don't understand, and it has a really significant impact on the scenario. So that's, and if it is what it is, that's fine. I just
Right.
want to understand.
Okay.
Can I throw a quick comment in? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
Just from an equity standpoint, I appreciate and want to be sensitive to people who feel upset because they purchased a home in a particular neighborhood with the understanding that they would go to a school. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge that people who purchased a home are coming from a place of privilege. And the fact that they are able to have those choices puts them on a level of privilege that a lot of our families do not have. And I think we need to keep that lens in mind when we're talking about these things.
Thank you, Sandra, for putting that into the room.